Hello, I'm Imara Jones, and welcome to our TransLash Lives at Stake conversation. This is the first Lives at Stake conversation we are having, but it'll be the first of many, not only on today's topic, but on others as well. Our next one's going to be on October 16th, where we're going to talk about the fallout of the October 8th argument before the Supreme Court about whether or not we should have rights or not with Chase Strangio. But today, our conversation is between Black cis heterosexual men and Black trans women. My project TransLash, this project TransLash, is a cross-platform digital media project that focuses on spotlighting and centering the stories of trans people, particularly trans people of color, at this moment of backlash. Our aim and our goal is essentially to tell trans stories in order to humanize us and, well, to help save our lives. And there's no greater group of trans people whose lives we need to focus on than that of Black trans women. Trans women in the United States are being murdered at a rate not seen in any other country on the planet except for Brazil and Mexico. 90% of those killed are Black trans women, overwhelmingly in every single case where there is a suspect, someone who's been arrested, or someone who's been convicted, that's been at the hands of a Black cis heterosexual identifying men. Therefore, it means that the murder of Black trans women in the United States is actually on a global scale and at a global epidemic, which is why we think it's really important to have this conversation today. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Justin Freeman, who is a Black cis heterosexual man. We'll get into all of his manhood bona fides for people who care about that sort of thing. A lot of men do, which is why we're dying. And also Nala Simone, who is an activist, beauty person. What else do you do?
So many things.
So many things to have this conversation. Now, I have to start out by expressing my disappointment. We were supposed to be joined, as you know, by another person whose name is Randy Davidson. Now, Randy is more on the trans skeptical part of the spectrum and on the conversation. We wanted to have a range of Black cis heterosexual men's views expressed today because we need to begin to have the conversation. But just less than an hour before we started, Randy called and backed out and said that he had a family emergency which had not been expressed in any of the conversations that we had before. So consequently, we have to leave Randy's chair empty for this conversation. And one of the reasons why it's so distressing to me personally and to all of us, we actually had this conversation before we came on, is that it's actually emblematic of the gap in the conversation that we need to have, right? We need to be talking to people who are skeptical, maybe perhaps even hostile to us having rights, because that's the only way that we're actually going to be able to engage and change the culture and to help save lives. But we're going to go ahead and have an amazing conversation anyway, because each of us have insights into where we are and how we can move forward. And so we're going to have that conversation. A couple of ground rules. One, you'll see me with my phone from time to time. It's not because I'm on Grindr. It's actually because I want to engage and hear from you all and your conversations, particularly because we have an absence in the seat of Black cis heterosexual men. We want to encourage those who are Black cis and heterosexual to participate in the conversation. We'll be tracking your comments here, and we'll be bringing you in the conversation by me asking the questions on your behalf and sharing your comments. And just so that you know, everyone here is now trans friendly and trans supportive, so we're going to have a supportive conversation. We're actually going to start out by me asking Justin some questions. Nala and I spoke about this before, and the reason why is because so many times when we talk about the murders of Black trans women, somehow Black trans women are always asked to speak first when we're not the one killing ourselves. I mean, Justin isn't either, but we want to sit back as women and hear what men have to say, so we're going to let Justin kick us off in that conversation. So thank you for letting us use you as the opening piñata, Justin, but I know that you can take it. One of the things that's curious to me, and I think would be curious to our audience, is that you're not trans skeptical, right? You're actually a trans ally, trans supportive, and we should say that, you have a daughter, you have an almost fiance. I know you're looking for rings.
Blow that up.
It's true. Sorry, Lauren, but I know, you served in the armed forces, you did stuff in the armed forces that you can't talk about. You grew up in East Flatbush. You are of Jamaican and African American heritage. So in many ways, you fit the type of profile and person that we would see at a family cookout. So how did you get to the point of being, a trans ally? And when you think and hear about trans women, what's your emotional response?
Great. So I think for everyone, it starts out young. My mother, she always instilled in me the fact that you shouldn't judge people at all. So she has a condition called albinism. People would call her an albino and take her the human aspect away from her by calling her that. That's what you would call an animal or something. And so she always told me it's not polite to stare. It's not polite to make someone feel like they're the only person in the room. And so with that, I had this sense of I always needed to respect someone's humanity. And not only that, but I've had LGBTQ people throughout my life that had strong impacts on my intellect, on my sense of fashion, my outlook on the world, and it never affected, my masculinity in that sense. As far as the way that I view trans women, I see them as women. I don't look at them any differently, but at the same time, I don't want to sound like I don't see color. I am sensitive to these things. One of the things that I am sensitive to when my mom told me, to be mindful about the way someone feels is like how a trans person presents and how they may not feel like they pass and how maybe that affects them. And so sometimes when I see a trans person, a person that I assume to be trans or identifying as trans, I get like this. I wonder if they're okay, but should I even be feeling that? Should I be worried about if they're having issues with their identity? I try to think about all of these things. I try to be as empathetic as possible with people.
Right. It sounds empathetic to me. One of the things that you spoke about in the preparation for this conversation was how when you told people that you were coming to have this conversation with us, that they were initially frosty, and you were really struck by the fact that that no one kind of was supportive from your homies, your homies from where you grew up in East Flatbush.
Right.
What do you think is behind that reticence? So that is, that contributes to sort of Randy not showing up today. That is to say that people are even silent or skeptical about even having a conversation.
Right. I think that because they all end up upholding toxic masculinity together, and so they end up checking each other. So it'll be a matter of, what are you doing there? And word will get out to other friends that this person is allied with trans people, and so he's not to be trusted. They would say things like, don't smoke after him, you know what I mean? Don't smoke weed after him because this person might do something crazy. Don't hang out with this person because they might take you somewhere where you don't know where you're going and you might end up being taken advantage of. All of these wild theories that are involved in how to check men from not faltering or being exposed to certain things. And I'm surprised. I don't understand why no one is good job, Justin, or even why they aren't asking me questions about trans people in general. Why aren't they, rather than being completely standoffish, how come they don't bother to question what's up? How can I get on a level? And I was hoping that Randy could kind of articulate those points, but things happen as they do.
Yeah. One last question before I'm curious as to what you think is, on this whole thing, this policing of masculinity, right? So you're saying that the fragility is so intense that even being seen as having a conversation or smoking weed after someone whose masculinity might be in question
Right.
is that intense. So actually, I was going to ask you another question, but I'm going to do this one. So what then is manhood, right?
Right.
If manhood is so precarious that even talking to someone who is perceived as not upholding traditional patriarchy, or if you can't even be seen as learning or associating with anything that's new or different, masculinity, as we're taught, is supposedly about confidence and being outgoing and adventurous and, rushing to the places where angels fear to tread. But if what you're saying is really what it is, then what upholds it? Like, what is it at the center?
I mean, we collectively uphold, this toxic masculinity. All of it is a false sense of confidence, a false sense of bravado, and it's necessary to hold up your psyche, to hold up who you are, to hold up your identity. And if you don't have this, basically, right? Who are you? What are the values that hold that keep men the way that they are? Keep us oppressing, because ultimately what we're doing is we're oppressing ourselves.
Right.
We're by checking each other, we're oppressing ourselves, and we're upholding layers of oppression that are over us as well.
Right.
Willfully, gleefully, and that's really disturbing. And then there's people, what I would say, below us that we want to keep below us, like trans people, that we are lashing out at because maybe we do it to ourselves, but it's easier to do it to people that you consider are less human than you are.
Right. So it's like actually based upon oppression. It's not based upon anything internal. It's about where you are in this order. We just got a note from someone whose name is Jeff Baker on Facebook, who said, "I saw Nala on The Breakfast Club. I'm so glad to see her here because I don't think that she had a chance to speak." So we're going to fix that now.
Yeah.
So you will have a chance to speak.
Thank
When
you.
you hear what Justin has said about the fragility, about sometimes the confusion that men have in terms of who they are as people and what it means to be a man, what strikes you, and what are some of the ways in which you've experienced that in your own life?
Well, that's a great question. I think a lot of what you were saying, Justin, I'm nodding and I'm resonating with it because it makes sense and it's true. To answer that question, it's difficult from my experience. I often see not just men, cis men, I see men, women, all people across the gender spectrum who are attracted to me. I think particularly when it comes to cis black men who are attracted to black women, and when they see me as a black woman, and then I say, hey, I want to invite you into what my existence of womanhood looks like. Because there is stigma, because there is shaming around it, it becomes a path for them where they go, I want to get to know you, but only in closed doors. And if we do get into closed door, I only want to be intimate with you, whether sexually, or I want to tell you about my problems that I'm going on so I can get healed, so that when I go outside, I'll be with a cisgender woman and we'll have a healed relationship. And so that leaves trans women, particularly black trans women, doing a lot of emotional labor, taking on the baggage, as we often have done, for the forefront of movements, social movements, of lifting up all black people so that all black people can be freed. But there's a shaming on what freeness looks like, right, as it pertains to gender. So I think for me, I just struggle on even answering the question, because I'm like, I want brothers to do the work. I want brothers to undo it. I can't. It's like how we say black people, we can't. Us as black people can't undo racism. We can't. White people have to do it. And so when it comes to the violence that we see on black trans women, particularly at the hands and proximity of the men who are attracted to us and date us,
Right.
They have to do that work.
Right.
Of undoing it. And I think the gap is that they don't have the nuance or the tools, because no woman around their life is sitting down to talk to them about undoing that, because women are also upholding toxic masculinity. Or like, I want a man who talks to me aggressively or X, Y, and Z. You know what I'm saying? Like it only affirms that that's okay, and it's not.
Right, a couple of things. I think,
Yeah.
one of the things that I mean, you said so much there. Like,
Sorry.
I could like do like we could do the whole show just on three or the four things that you said. I mean, one of the things that you're getting at, which is interesting, is that one of the reasons why Black men struggle is that they don't really have a lot of emotional tools.
Okay.
And you were saying that, because I don't only think that, by the way, it's the women I think that men, it's like everyone who raises Black boys, like, doesn't actually raise them to be emotional beings.
It's like,
right?
it's to be strong and not to have emotion and to take the weight and the blunt of things. And it's like we're not creating healing within our community when we do that.
That's right.
And we see like the mental health rate, right? And suicide amongst Black people in general, but Black men as well.
That's right. I mean, and the other thing that's really fascinating in there is I'm curious. So when you say that there are some, Black cis heterosexual men who are attracted to Black trans women and who get healed, in your experience or from what you've heard, you don't necessarily have to tell us if you don't want to, your personal opinion, but from what you've heard, what is the nature of the healing that they need and that they're getting from Black trans women?
It being able to be vulnerable and be able to be open and free in a moment where they're not being told how to be as men. And so that's when they take off the cape.
Oh, I get it. Because in a trans relationship, they may have greater flexibility to actually express a whole range of parts of themselves.
Yeah, and it's about an intimacy that's freeing. Like, into me, I see you.
Right.
I actually see you, not what people are telling you to be. So I'm seeing you in an intimate setting where vulnerability can take place.
Yeah.
Exploring without judgment. Exploring without judgment.
Right, because if you were the cis woman, they may judge that exploration as not being manly enough.
There you go.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is really important, another reason why we're having this conversation is because October is Domestic Violence Month, and many of these cases are people who know these trans women, right? They either dated them, they've either had sex with them, they either live next door to them, which is why we're not going to talk about the details today, but if you read about the details of these murders, they're brutal and they're intimate, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's especially there was the one from Monday that you can go read about that was particularly horrific. And so within that, at some point though, these emotions that you're talking about, this openness, this freeing thing that they experience with Black trans women because we're outside of the binary for them, right? We may still be in the binary for ourselves, but for them, we represent being outside the binary. Somehow at some point turn sour, right? Someone at some point can turn angry. So, and some point can turn violent.
Yeah.
Where do you think that switch happens?
I believe it's multiple causes, right? It could be that a trans woman says, you know what, I can no longer do this relationship. And it becomes, if I can't have you, then no one else can have you.
Yeah.
Or it can also, it can also be, I want to be with you, and I'm not ready to tell people I'm with you. And so it becomes a conversation, right? When one person was like, I'm just going to tell people that we've seen each other since you won't. And then it comes to a moment of silence.
Yeah.
I'm going to take your life so that you won't be able to share.
Right.
Right? But a lot of the things around it is also faith-based as well.
How do you mean?
Folks' religions, belief, ideology, right? Around, Adam and Eve and all that concept of creating life again and not be, like, a lot of the theology that comes out of the harm, I should say, trans women experience, because it's also violence, is when men who engage with us was like, I want to be with you, but you can't have kids. That's another form of violence.
Yes.
Right? And so the violence that trans women experience is not just from like the physical aspects of being murdered, but the day-to-day aspect, the emotional labor,
just walking through the world,
walking through the cat calls, the taunting, like all of that thing is like all in like that glass. It's like trans women literally have to navigate as if they're in a field of mind bombs. No matter which way they step, something's gonna blow up.
Yeah. It's
I hope I answered that question.
You did. You
Okay.
did. You answered it and more. One of the things Mojo, who you know, Mojo Disco, said that in relating to your comment about black cis men and black trans women in relationships, she said, you know, we black trans women are their paradise.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you hear the talk about men at somewhat, well, first of all, I think we should say that this pattern of intimate partner violence with black trans women mimics the exact same pattern with black cis women overall,
Absolutely.
right? So the number one, black cis women, black women overall, have the highest intimate partner murder rate
Absolutely.
than any other group of country and any other group in the country, closely followed by Native women, but black women are at the top. So there's something in general, and that relates to this idea where, on some level, I've had a couple of conversations with black cis heterosexual men. I've even had them ask me questions in public settings. And it doesn't go as deep as what Nala did, right? What they'll say is the reason why we turn violent isn't because we don't have the emotional tools, you know, we don't have the ability to be able, you feel freeing, and then if I lose you, you're not all of the analysis that you have.
I hear you.
But there overwhelmingly is, well, she tricked me.
Yes. Oh, I knew that was coming. I was waiting.
And what's
waiting for
what's
this.
fascinating to me about the trickery comment is that it's weird because it means on some level that black trans women are too much woman, right? So we were woman enough to, or more than woman enough to bring you in, right? I'm using their language and their lens. I don't agree with any of this. Right. But then somehow when they discover you're less than a woman, right? So it's this weird thing where they both like say that we're too much and not enough. And, you know, when you have conversations with your homies just about women in general, how does this like pattern fit in for how black men think about women in general?
I mean, I think, well, one thing to say is like being lied to doesn't mean that then you have license to kill someone. Like, you don't
Right.
like just that shouldn't be a thing at all. There's no justice from that.
Right.
I think that with trans women, the way men see it is that they're having sex with a man, right? And so that gets back into the biblical perspective that a lot
You
of
were saying.
The theology of
men
it.
feel, right? Their ideology that, you know, that having sex with a man is like the ultimate sin, and then it goes towards how you're going to be judged within your society and everything like that. So for the most part, it is definitely, yes, that's a gay man tried to like hide his true self to
Wow.
have sex with me.
Wow, gag.
Right? I don't even...
Yeah.
And that explains something because in the conversations that I had with Randy, because we actually did have several conversations during the week as a prep, just like I had with you two. And one of the things that he kept bringing up, and I couldn't get my head around it, I literally couldn't understand it, is that he kept saying, well, you know, LGBTQ people are asking for too many rights. And so I said to him at one point, I was like, well, this conversation is actually about trans women. Like, it's not about the entire panoply of LGBTQ. And he goes, yeah, I know, but it's related.
Because, and that goes back to what I was saying on the Breakfast Club, is that oftentimes sexual orientation, who folks want to go to bed with, gets conflated with identity.
Right.
But why does it get conflated like this, where they're like, you're actually sleeping with a man?
Because what ends up happening is that the whole idea of someone transitioning is not a concept that they accept.
Right.
That's the piece. And so they're not accepting that there's no such thing. God made you just the way you are.
Wow. Huh.
And so, and which is interesting for me because we'll accept evolution from dinosaur to the way how the body has literally changed and morphed. But we won't think of the concept of understanding that spirit, mind, and body sometimes are not aligned, and sometimes there are extra support that you need to do so that everything aligns.
Right. Yeah,
So I find that interesting.
I mean, but it's also the fact that there is an ignorance, right? And the heart of the ignorance is that for as long as we have had recorded history,
Yeah.
for as long as human beings have been able to record other human beings, we've existed.
Yeah,
right?
from slavery. From
No,
everything.
not from slavery. I mean, like from the dawn of like
Absolutely.
cave paintings 30,000 years ago. Like we are in recorded history.
That's right.
We are oftentimes are at the center of cultures in the past and ancient times.
And worshipped.
And worshipped, seen as being like a manifestation of God rather than in contrast with God. And so there's actually a part of this piece of the hostility is actually literally ignorance about who we are.
And is a willingness ignorance to it.
A willful ignorance.
It's like a willfulness. And I wanted to just go back to something you said about, I don't know exactly how you worded, but something that I had to jot down before I went is that people assume what woman is.
Right.
And what women should be. And so that piece, I think you were saying that it's like if someone comes, said that they're trans or whatever the case may be, I think almost like when Malik Gilbert was like, I didn't know you were trans. I didn't even know you were trans. And so it's that moment of that cringing moment. It's like, well, what is trans supposed to have a look? It doesn't have a look.
Right.
I think we've been told through media what it should look like.
Right.
Right, when we think about the demonization, right, through like Jerry Springer and all these things, like we haven't seen trans women educated and doing certain things, and we know that through history, trans women have been supporting in a lot of our existence and why we get to be free in the ways that we are currently navigating.
Right. One of the questions that we had is from Giselle Blues, and she asks a really important question that I think we should engage on is, what is your advice for a black man who is closeted about dating the trans women he is with? Like, what would you advise them?
I think just people feel like they have access to who people date in. So that's one thing. I think when being closet creates harm on the trans individual, where she is not able to be free, that emotional labor, I think that's where the violence happens. Right? I don't think anyone should have access to anyone's relationship unless that one invites you into it. Right? The issue is the oppression that trans person will experience by that guy not being that guy said, I won't be open with you around in public. I won't take you out, because if I take you out, you know what's gonna happen. I can't go to the park. I can't bring you home to mama. You know what's gonna happen. That's where the violence happens. So so when down low, I think the advice that I give to, and I'm not even giving it to guys, I'm like to my sisters, I'm like, just be mindful of the energy that it'll put you. If he's not ready, or she, because I think, again, we're having this conversation about guys, and I understand, but we just have an assumption that all trans women just date men, and I just think that's just like...
That's another conversation.
That's a whole nother thing, and we'll have that conversation another time. But it really is about, like, that guy has work to do. And until he's able to do the work for himself where he feels content to move without bondage, I don't think a free soul should be with somebody that's in bondage.
Well, that's the advice. That's the advice. So we are going to sort of go for probably another 6 or 7 minutes. I want to make sure that we're able to take your questions, which is why I'm logging on into my phone to see if there are other questions that everyone has. I think one person just asked Justin, which is interesting, which is that we know that you're not, you have not dated trans women. You're about to, you are in a situation. So hopefully this will be your last relationship, right? But the question is, broadly speaking, would you feel comfortable dating a trans woman?
I don't know. I think that's a really complex question, because I do think that because trans women are women, in my eyes, that they are attractive, right? But then I don't want to fall into that, like, fetishization of a woman. So I wouldn't want it to be just because she's trans, or it. So it's very hard for me to kind of answer that question. I don't know, because I think, to be honest, it is a lot about perception. And I think men do have issues with how they would be viewed by even the thought of the question can make you feel defensive, right? So you're like, oh, okay, would I date a trans woman? I would say that I don't know. That I could be honest to say that I don't know.
Go ahead. Go ahead. We both. But go. No, you're the guest. You should talk.
And to me, I'm like, yeah, and you know, like to me, like I'm like I think for me, I've gotten to a place of like I don't want to be dating someone that is not okay with dating me, because it just the relationship just won't work. And I think the conversation I think what I'm worried about and how I'm framing is that I think there's validation when we get seen by black men, and for some folks, and the validation also. The validation sometimes come with when I think about when we are born, the first relationship we have to love is with our parents. Mother, father. And so when I think about folks who often are in relating and are attracted to masculinity or men across gender identity, whatever presentation of energy is there, I think particularly the validation that is needed, particularly from black men, is because we know black men have been seeing us and being with us. And so what is required is that black men come out and be honest and say, yes, I am attracted to. Because evident of phone calls and text messages.
The DMs.
The DMs prove there is attraction there. And I think it's almost as if it's a slap in the face when men don't say yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 4 questions that I'm going to ask, and we're going to go a little bit longer because they're all really good. So if you haven't asked a question now, tough, because the rest of the time is going to be taken on these questions. One of the things I wanted to say really quickly is that I think this is one of the things that actually black lesbians have to teach black trans women is how to exist as women without the male gaze.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important thing. So go back and read your Combahee River Collective. Go back and think about what is womanhood, what is femininity outside of the idea of being in relationship to or being in response to masculinity, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things people in TV land told us that we, even though we're really passionate, to be careful about shaking the table because people at home think we're having an earthquake. So that's not what we want to have because we're doing this and the camera's moving.
We are people of rhythm. It is in our since the day. So touching things, stomping on it is
Correct. Correct. All right, so we're going to take these 4 questions in turn. The first is from Natalie Turner, and she says, do you feel that cis black women are doing enough to include trans people in discussion around sexual and domestic violence?
I say yes and. Because oftentimes when we say no, I think we dismiss the ones that are standing with us, including some of our mothers who hold space for us when we have to cry, for those who have that.
Right.
And so I oftentimes, I think folks are often saying no. I'm saying yes, and there's more to be done.
Right.
I'm saying yes, they are, and yet it is not enough. There's more to be done.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, but I also do think that we're talking about, October is Domestic Violence Month, and I haven't seen a lot of conversations about the fact that, the epidemic of black trans murders, and it was identified by the American Medical Association last week as being an epidemic, is being fueled often by intimate partner violence, and for us to be folded into that. So I think from a public standpoint and public policy, there's a lot more for us to do. Mickey Bradford, first of all, says that wants us to give a shout out to queer, bisexual trans women, and also black lesbian
and
trans
pansexual,
women.
all gender loving.
Mickey, so we want to make sure that we do that. It's also the case that she asks, for cis black men, where are the spaces or resources to unlearn toxic masculinity? How do you think I would have to open it up because I don't know if there's a specific resource. I mean, I think they have to start reading feminist literature, honestly, Black feminist literature. But what do you think are ways that Black men can unlearn toxic masculinity?
I think it's by, just coming out of their comfort zone and meeting people that I think they aren't familiar being with. I think one of the big things that changed the way I look at these issues is by getting to know you, going to the spaces that you've been in, hearing the talks that you've given. It's really like changed my perspective about toxic masculinity. And I also think like getting older and having more experiences and being with strong women in general has allowed me to see what the effects of my toxic masculinity on women.
Wow.
Speaking with my mother, what she has to say about her relationship with my stepfather, how that's transpired. Toxic masculinity is super pervasive, and it's really hard for us to like kind of get that skin off of us. It's like a full body like scab, and peeling it off is super painful. And so what I try to do, having a daughter, it's important for me to be a feminist. It's important for me to understand trans femininity as well. And that's a testament a lot to what you've exposed me to, and I really appreciate that. It's like a lot of the things that you taught me I've put in my toolbox, and it means a lot to me.
Thank you so much. And I hope that whoever is live tweeting got your quote about toxic masculinity being a scab that you have to pull off. I think it's really amazing. Just a couple of resources that people have been sending through. Apparently, that in response to your question, Mickey, Brown University offers a program for male students to unlearn toxic masculinity. There are prisoners in California at the it's called Guiding Rage into Power program, which also teaches ways to unlearn toxic masculinity. So there are these initiatives that are emerging, and we need to find a way to lift those up and to talk about them. One of the things that Angela Jones asks is beyond ignorance, which I said is a part of this. She asks, what role does white supremacy and patriarchy
I love this question.
play into the way that Black men see masculinity in trans women?
Well, I think I always like this, love this type of question because it does play a lot of role. Because if we think about us as African descent, a lot of our culture is around a lot of different gender expressions. Like when you see the Dinka tribe men wearing corsets, right, and thongs, right? Culture. Where you see in other makeup, where there's a competition of who's the prettiest man.
That's right.
And so a lot of white, like this slavery has played a lot of roles of what we deem what men should be and how they should be.
That's right.
And when we think about cultures and the way that they love,
right,
polygamy, polyamorously, like all of those things, we have to understand that us not feeling free and that binding and us killing is also connected to the system, how the system is being worked.
Right.
Right? And how it also connects to access and resource. And so this conversation that we often have is because when I hear, particularly I'm shifting a little bit, but I'll get into is that Black women will often say, you're redefining what womanhood is.
Mm-hmm.
You're redefining, and they feel attacked. Mm-hmm. When I'm saying, no, I'm not redefining. I'm saying, yes, you are a woman. I said, and our journey looks different.
Right.
And I want to honor you. We are not your enemies. We're literally your sisters.
100%.
Right? And I think the conversation is that there isn't enough space. Scarcity.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Scarcity.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, so now you're going to take up space at this table when there isn't enough space at the table for Black women as is. There isn't enough men go out there, Black good men, and now here you come. I got to fight with race. I got to fight with hair, body shape, colorism, and now I got to fight another thing. Like, for Black women, it's like there isn't enough. And black cis young girls, black cis women have been saying, well, when are we going to have a conversation about what we're going through? And it's like, yes, we're going to have a conversation, and the conversation is now. And a lot of this is also tied to gender-based violence.
Yeah.
Around femme bodies. So it's not an either or, it's an and conversation.
Yeah.
It is enough space.
I mean, I think one of the things that I always say to black cis women is that, like, if you don't understand that misogyny is working against me too, then I don't really know what to tell you.
That's
right?
right.
Like I really struggle to have that conversation, because the reason why people are so hostile to us is because we actually are women, right? And so therefore it is the same fight. The way that domestic violence plays out for cis women and black trans women plays out the exact same way. Right. So if you don't see those patterns in that overture, it also means that we center masculinity in a way. That's just right. Going back to Angela's question, I mean, one of the things that is true is that, in Africa before enslavement and before imperialism, there are patriarchal systems of power that exist and still exist right now, but there are also matrilineal systems of power that mirrored those, that acted as a check on them. But when imperialists came, they just totally ignored women leadership and women power and focused on men and empowered the men. And so that's one of the ways in which African patriarchy got solidified, and the way in which that plays out. So the other thing is that, imperialism has to classify people, capitalism has to classify people in order for profit. And so as a part of that, that means that you do have to narrow and define who men are, who women are. I mean, even the idea of white womanhood got restricted to the idea of who's a lady and who's not, right? And that was about access to money and power. So there's a whole interplay here that we could spend the whole hour on that. Do you have something quickly to add, Justin? Because you are gonna get your PhD in philosophy and you think a lot about this. How do you think that, politically in power systems, this plays into how black men see trans women? The idea of racism.
I think it goes into the master-slave dialectic that Hegel discusses, that these layers of oppression are all imposed via violence. And so, when the master is trying to rule the slave, they do it through violence. The slave picks up on this violence and exerts this violence among themselves, as a way. And so the way that we check ourselves to make sure that we're not going outside of white patriarchy is through violence. And so it's almost like a domino effect of the way that we keep ourselves in check. And I don't know what the other way is to kind of like get rid of that overarching theme of which I think is ultimately violence. But at least we're sitting here at the table and we're talking about these issues, and it's important that we have this discussion. So I really do think that I really understand what you're saying, how societies were matrilineal and patriarchal to keep themselves in check. If we had something like that in our society, who knows what it would be like, right?
Right. It would be radically different.
Right. What would the potential of our society? We have great potential in our society for trans women if they were, allowed to have parity within society as men do. Economy would be crazy.
Totally different.
Sciences would be crazy, but we suppress because that's the way white patriarchy wants it to be.
It has to be. One last question before we sort of head to our wrap up is Kelly asks, he wanted some clarification on your conversation about perception of passing. So when you were saying, when I see someone who is trans,
that's
I
what
perceive.
My response was too. Yeah.
That was your
that was my
response.
Thing? That was my response to that. Was like, wait, what? Is that folks? That's my issue. Is that cis men assume they know what trans is and what trans is not.
Right, and I get that, and I think that's where the empathy or even like, I guess it's almost like prejudging to a certain degree, but I keep it to myself, you know what I mean? Because it's an observation, and I'm trying to work that out in my head, what exactly what exactly the situation is. But at the end of the day, like, it's a matter of humanity. Like, I'm not gonna treat somebody differently based on what is this a trans person?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if this guy has earrings on, who they present if they look like gender fluid,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm not gonna assume what their genders are or anything like that. I'm just gonna treat them as a person ultimately.
And I think there's space in that, because when we're talking about treating like a person, I think what that looks like is engaging in conversations that's intimate and relationship building. And I think people don't get to that relationship building pieces because they're like, I don't know how to engage.
Right. And
That's the piece.
And so, you know, when you talk about dating someone that's trans,
Or
right?
just friendship or building.
Right. So, like, I think for men, we assume that if we get with who we think is a woman, we're going to go the full way, right? Whereas if
That's violence.
right,
Like, it's violence.
it is, but that's kind of like a lot of what the
Because
situation
that also says
is.
like you're entitled to get something.
Right. And so me thinking like if I date a trans person, I'm thinking about like, okay, when do we get down to the discussion of what's the intimacy going to be like? And that's none of my business until we get to that point.
Right.
And so that's where the relationship building comes in. And that's what's the most important part of a relationship, of meeting someone, right? Society has gotten to this point where it's only about sex.
Yeah.
Right? Or it's been that way for a long time. And so men definitely, they feel like, I'm going to have sex with this woman, and that's what it is.
We're playing rhythm with the drums.
But if it's with a trans person, I think there's a lot of ambiguity. I don't know.
I say I hear you, and I disagree that in that there's ambiguity. I feel like folks still lean in.
Right.
Still. Right, and I think what we're talking about are the folks that are curious.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right, I think that's what we're talking about. But from experience, folks are able to engage in relationship and be like, oh, I'm attracted to you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you like? And I think it's simply that piece of like, what do you like to do? What affirm you? Can I do this? Am I able to do that? Those kind of questions.
Look, first of all, like, this is clearly a conversation that may be a Facebook Live. Y'all are getting in the nitty gritty of stuff about how you ask about certain things, when you ask certain things, intimacy. I'm like, okay, this is turning into a tutorial.
Sorry, y'all.
It's turning into a tutorial.
Yeah, we're not doing that.
One very, very, very last question, and I'm going to ask everyone to be exceptionally brief because we have gone past our time. So one of the people, Mojo Disco, complained beforehand that a half an hour was too late. Look at your watch. We are almost at an hour. So there you go. We listened, and we learned. Mojo also asked, I think this is a really good place for us to end on. What do you think, and we'll ask you, Nala,
Okay.
and then you can respond in terms of how you think. What do Black trans women need Black cis men to know right now, right this minute?
Whew. That's cool. I think I'm gonna speak on the I can't speak on everyone.
Yeah, so talk about
I think is that for me. I think there's harm, there's hurt. I think that's what I wrestle with every day. Is that the emotional labor and the work that's put to heal a lot of the men that I have encountered. For them to never be like, okay, what is it that you need? How can I support you? I feel like those are acts of violence, right? And I think that's what I wrestle with. Is like, if I'm good enough for you to share something intimate, then my life must matter for you enough to step in,
right,
and say something. My life must matter enough for you to be like, I see you. What is it that you need? Did you eat? How did you get from point A to point B today? Like those simple nuance. And I just step up. Just like literally just step up. Like check your boys. Check your boys. Check your sisters.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like at the core of what you're saying is this idea, and this is what I tell people all the time, is that like you should think as a black cishet man that the needs of women and black trans women are just as important as you think your needs are.
Absolutely.
Right? So whatever the degree of intensity that you feel like you have or you need something, realize that there are other people that feel that same way. And that type of reciprocity, my mom used to call the X Factor reciprocity, a Lauryn Hill song. But that type of reciprocity is so missing from a whole host of gender relationships. And I honestly think that if that was a consideration, that there'd be a lot less deaths.
Yeah.
What do you think when you hear that? As kind of our last comment before we end.
I mean, to be fair, this is like such a big learning process for me. The fact that I know that men rely on women emotionally a lot. We have so much emotional baggage. Men don't talk about issues together. You know
Clearly.
what I mean, on their own, right? And so, the idea, that the relationship is the same for cis women as it is for trans women is eye-opening for me in that respect, that emotional relationship there. I would say, like, the idea that we do have to check each other. Men definitely do. What the problem is, though, is that so many men they're reticent to change. I think they're even worried about violence from other men. So when you compound all of that, it makes it easier for them to kill another woman because of the kind of retribution
that they fear.
Right. It could end up being their own life. So even me like saying like, check your boys or whatever, or we need to check ourselves, could put a target on me, you know what I mean? But not to make myself seem...
Yeah, of course.
That, but...
Because when I hear you say that, I also hear that it's okay for women to be vulnerable without support, is what I hear as well. Because if women are doing the work, right, and women get attacked as well.
Yes, definitely.
That means that means that you may possibly think that it's okay to be exempt from that.
I don't think he was.
I know. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that that's what happens. Is that's where the emotional labor comes. I'm just adding context to.
Right.
That is what happens. That women. Where do women end up having to go to? What's their outlet? Right?
Each other.
And so, I mean, we should be supportive as well. It would create a more robust relationship, but that's not what it's almost like that's not what we're into as men, and to do so would be like going against toxic masculinity, and there's that scab again, right? That's going outside of our comfort zone, what we were taught. We weren't taught to be sounding boards. We were like when we hurt ourselves, we run to mom, when we hurt someone else, even as well, we run to mom.
Or something that emulates mother.
That stands in for mother.
Mm-hmm.
So, right. Well,
I don't know why I keep hearing. Sorry.
What were you gonna say?
I keep hearing this thing about empathy, because I think often what I'm hearing is that black men don't get the empathy and the grace. I think that's true, I think that's true, but I also think that I know that I'm personally done not holding them accountable. Right. I'm personally done thinking about how the world is so a bad place for black men and that we should be overly sympathetic to them. I think that we have to demand that they grow up. I think that if you think about what I told someone once, I said,
think about everything that a black man goes on, and then layer on top of that, like extreme sexual violence. Layer on top of that,
That's right.
the type of other types of violence that women face, and then that's black women. And so, why do black women not get a pass in terms of
right.
like being responsible, showing up for people, being emotionally?
That's right.
It's not, but black men don't. It's not black women overall that are killing black men, even though, you know, according to the same outline that we're talking about, there would be an understanding of
Yeah.
that. I think that we have to demand. We have to demand that black men grow up. We have to demand that they act better. We have to demand that they stop. And that's what we are starting to do today. So before I close, I just wanted to give one last comment, which is Mickey said that we should, that she just wants to celebrate how beautiful we are inside and out. You, me, Nala. So, you too, Justin.
Hey.
I'll just include you.
Thank you, Mickey.
I want to thank you all for joining us for this important conversation. As I said, it's going to be the first of many. It won't be the last. We're going to continue to hold black men accountable. We're going to continue to have this conversation. We're going to hopefully have people who show up that help us to advance that conversation. Our next Lives at Stake, as I mentioned, is going to be on October 16th with Chase Strangio, where we're going to talk about the fallout and the ramifications of the argument on October the 8th before the Supreme Court about whether or not trans and LGBTQ people can be protected by law in the United States. And I also just wanted to say that on this question of resources for toxic masculinity, what we're going to do is we have a weekly newsletter, so you can go to translash.org and sign up for our newsletter. In our next newsletter, we're going to include some of the resources that we spoke about and others that we're going to find. So go to translash.org to sign up for our newsletter to get those resources and to stay up to date about this project. Thank you for joining us for Lives at Stake, and continue the conversation online and amongst your friends. We have to change the culture, and we start doing that by talking. So thank you.